Mr. Godfrey. First of all, I would like to congratulate you on your new appointment. I also have immense confidence that in the future, you will make invaluable contributions to our community. I think, when Mr. Dono stepped down before you, if the office email hadn't been cleaned up, you might be surprised by my inbox is overflowing with emails, but I trust Mr. Godfrey. Don't let this make you think there's a huge problem in our community. On the contrary, our Pamian community has long enjoyed peace and quiet, a beautiful environment, and is a place deeply loved by the vast majority of working-class families. I have to admit, these letters, essentially, are complaints regarding issues from our Snow family. Therefore, I need to write to inform you of the whole story, and I would like to request some of your valuable time, Mr. Godfrey. I hope I can borrow some of Mr. Godfrey's precious time. I read this long letter to the end. My name is Ladun Snow. About 2 years ago, I divorced my beloved wife. The court granted me custody of my son, Kuji. To get away from that old house that broke my heart, I began searching for a new house. The only stroke of luck was that the real estate agent introduced me to a detached house in the Pamian community. It comes with a garage and a beautiful front yard. Everything was nearly perfect. A lovely environment and harmonious neighbors. I was very satisfied with all of this, so I quickly completed the house handover process. With anticipation for a new life, my 5-year-old son and I moved into our new home in the Pamian community. In the first year after moving in, I had to focus on dealing with a series of follow-up matters after moving away from the old community. There are urgent matters that I need to handle. I need to take care of Kuji's transfer to a new school. I also need to submit a request to my company for a transfer to a branch closer to here. At the same time, there are a series of follow-up procedures for the property transfer and returning the mortgage for the new house. Wait. This led to me, after the furniture was in place, hiring short-term cleaning staff to complete their cleaning and tidying. And I spent most of my time out and about. According to my plan, after I finished a series of follow-up chores, my life will get back on track. In this pleasant community, I will slowly forget the pain caused by my wife's departure. I will heal the issues that almost drove Kuji away from me. Everything will return to the shape of a happy life. Each day will feel like it's following a pattern. I wake up in the morning and store some instant noodles in the fridge, a few barley bread loaves and slices of ham. After breakfast, I take little Cookie to school. Then, I work until 9 p.m. Although little Cookie is only about 5 years old, his sense of direction has always been very good. Having just moved to the community for a while, he already knows the route from the bus stop to our home. And the neighborhood is extremely safe, with very good security, so I felt very relieved about Kuji going home from school alone. That continued for about 3 months. But then some small changes started to happen in my life. First, it started with my son, Kuji. Because I was so busy with work. Kuji is at school. How his social circle is doing, I hardly know. The only thing I know is, once, before bed, Kuji told me he had made 7 friends of foreign descent. Although communicating with them is still quite difficult, they really enjoy following little Kuji to learn some nursery rhymes. Upon hearing little Kuji's description, though there were some doubts, more than that, they were happy that little Kuji had made new friends. Because little Kuji suggested recording his new life through drawing. I gladly agreed. The next evening, while buying instant noodles and sliced ham, I also got a brand new box of 56 color watercolor pens for little Kuji. He was very happy about it. But I also gave him a warning. The walls of the house were freshly painted by me, and I paid a high price for it. No matter what, no one is allowed to draw on the walls of the house. I thought that my authority at home would still hold some weight, because I was sure little Kuji wouldn't dare break my iron rule. However, my authority seemed to last only a week. When I came home on Tuesday, a week later, a glaring graffiti, like a soft thorn, pierced into my vision. It was on the wall of the kitchen cupboard. It was a bright red arrow drawn with a watercolor pen, an indicator arrow. Now that I think about it, I must have been under a lot of pressure at work back then. Combined with the strict rules I had as a father, I faced serious questioning. I clearly lost my rational thinking at that time. Before my son could offer any explanation, I was like a wild beast gone mad, bursting into his room, and repeatedly questioning him whether he had forgotten what I told him not to do with the watercolor pens, even if I had to bear the consequences. The price I paid for making little Kuji cry all night was still throwing away his whole box of watercolors. And I threatened him not to rummage through the trash for the watercolors I threw away. The next day, before I could get the painter to repaint, above the red arrow from yesterday, another arrow appeared. Except this time, it was drawn with an orange pen. It was a downward-pointing arrow. Seeing this, I again lost my rationality and ability to think. Instead, I used anger to conclude that it must have been my son. I went to the trash can to search for the watercolor pens, even though he had already mustered the courage to explain to me it was the actions of his friends, but I didn't give my child any trust. I took the remaining pens of Kuji that were used for writing and brought them out, and I locked him in the room. I decided to punish him by making him go hungry for a day, and I really did do that. On the third day, I requested a leave of absence from his class teacher. I locked him in the room, and went out to do my work. Yes, from that moment on, I seemed to have become a bit uncontrollable emotionally. It wasn't until the third day after work that I finally came to my senses, waking up from the uncontrollable anger. I even felt regret. This is not how a father should behave. And if I don't quickly resolve things between Kugi and me, then next to come knocking will be the staff from the Women and Children's Welfare Committee. So after work, I specially went to the pizza place to buy his favorite mozzarella cheese pizza. I stopped by the store to buy a new set of watercolor pens, and when I pushed open the dim front door of the house, I had already prepared what I was going to apologize to him for. But the situation that followed was different from what I had imagined. The silence and the faint sound of sobbing. In the pitch-black room, where I couldn't see my hand in front of my face, I could vaguely hear the soft, childlike humming of a nursery rhyme. The nursery rhyme gave a sense of approaching, as if it were coming closer from afar. Finally, I determined that it was coming from my child, little Kuji's room. I didn't have time to react, immediately rushing to his door and unlocking it. Perhaps the person singing inside heard me turning the lock. The sound of the nursery rhyme abruptly stopped the moment I opened the door. There was no one in the room except for little Kuji. Little Kuji was lying on his bed, deeply immersed in sleep. His face still had 2 streaks of undried tears. At that moment, I felt overwhelming guilt. I instantly forgot everything. The nursery rhyme had filled me with both surprise and doubt. I gently woke my son. I spoke to little Kuji, still drowsy with sleep, apologizing. I was so relieved, facing a father who had become gentle again. A brand new crayon box and the aroma of pizza. Little Kuji accepted my apology. So I pulled my son into the kitchen to enjoy a late-night snack. Just as I was turning the microwave dial to heat up the pizza, I looked up and saw a new yellow crayon arrow. I shuddered. It was like a surge of electricity passed through my brain. This arrow appeared. Undoubtedly, it shattered all my previous theories about the origin of the arrow. I had wrongfully blamed my child. At the same time, there was a third intruder in my room. Could this be related to the nursery rhyme I heard at the beginning? At this moment, the microwave finished heating the pizza, and it interrupted my thoughts. I placed the hot pizza in front of little Kuji. Watching him already start to eat heartily, I asked, "Sweetheart, when did you hear that children's song earlier?" He answered seriously in his childish voice. "It must have been my friends singing it. They like to sing at night. The songs are the ones my mother used to hum to me before bed. They're the ones I'm most familiar with. So I taught them to sing them. It's just that I don't understand a word of the language they're singing in." The word, friend, was quickly retrieved from my memory. It quickly matched what little Kuji had told me earlier. The foreign friends who learned to sing from him. I suddenly remembered that although I had thrown away his colored pencils earlier, he must have kept the drawings he used to record his life. They should still be there. After getting little Kuji's permission, I entered his room. I found the sketchbook he used for recording. I began to flip through it. Most of the content. They're all drawings of life at school, and the scenery I saw from my own room's window. And some combined with trees, and template children's drawings incorporating clouds, houses, rainbows, and the sun. Finally, among dozens of drawings, I found one that might be related to the friend that little Kuji was talking about. A drawing that might be connected. It was a drawing with a theme of hands holding hands. The little boy with white skin in the picture should be my son. The rest of the figures were drawn with a black marker, as 7 nearly identical, featureless humanoid shapes. They might be the foreign friends that little Kuki mentioned. I quickly made the connection. Kuki's friends are probably all of African descent. That's why they're painted black. Also, there's something else very strange about this painting to me. A very unusual aspect. The people in the picture are all holding hands, heads together, forming a circle. Around them are drawings resembling mountains and houses. And within the circle, there's an indescribable object. Maybe it's because children lack the spatial imagination. And their imagination is overly abundant. I comfort myself this way. But subconsciously, some stereotypes I have about foreign-foot baths still make me unintentionally associate the arrows in the house with the singing in little Kuki's room, and the voodoo in Africa. The mysticism has created a connection. This forced me to keep an eye out and learn more about the backgrounds of a few of little Kuji's foreign friends. During my free time at work, I called little Kuji's teacher. On the phone, I learned that little Kuji's school is far from the community where most black people live. Plus, there aren't actually many black people in the Pamian community. Therefore, adding up all the students in all grades in the whole school, the number of black students can be counted on one hand. And because little Kugi was a transfer student, he had difficulty fitting in. Therefore, he didn't make any friends. After understanding these basic facts, I hung up the phone with a heavy heart. That is to say, the friend my son brought over might be an outsider roaming in our community. They might even be from afar. Perhaps they once belonged to an ancient race that once spread across that land. But only modern society has devoured and fragmented them. From now on, they can only rely on infiltrating various communities, becoming a part of modern society. But Mr. Godfrey, I have to admit to you that I hold certain prejudices and discriminations regarding foreigners. But this seemingly unreasonable and absurd speculation, it wasn't without reason. I bought a series of locks after work that day. I bought a series of locks. I installed locks on all the doors and windows in the house that I could. I installed locks on all the doors and windows. I even took little Kuji out with me for that. I spent a whole weekend doing it. But the unbelievable thing happened. New watercolor painted arrows kept appearing in the house. New watercolor painted arrows kept appearing in the house. I even called the police about it, hoping they would handle the matter of a possible home invasion. But the police didn't believe me. They didn't believe my deduction that the culprit might possess occult knowledge. The absurd conclusions about African American children. They showed me the surveillance footage from the past few days, and they promised me that there were no signs of violent break-ins in my house. But I just couldn't believe it. Even after the police left, there were still watercolor arrows drawn inside my house, and they kept increasing every day. This will bring the painter back again. The idea of repainting the walls is incredibly stupid. What drives me even crazier is, my neighbors around me have started complaining to the community about me, saying that my house is disturbing the peace at night, that there are always sounds of children singing children's songs. Although it wasn't my intention, I also almost faced a new investigation from the court due to these reports. But of course, the above is just a small prelude. Before the inexplicable ordeal I went through, these events didn't last more than a week, and they were almost perfectly handled by Mr. Dono. I assume you must know Mr. Dono. He's a little old man, who was the director of the community office before you. He always had a cheerful smile, and would ask if you were having a sunny day. A lovely old southern gentleman. Not only did he handle and negotiate those complaints about my house in a short time, but he also did so quickly. I drove away the media who sensed the sensational story, and came to watch. At the same time, I kept news about my house strictly under wraps, out of gratitude for Mr. Dono's help. I also bought a gift for him, along with a thank you letter. Mr. Dono enthusiastically accepted my thanks. He replied and explained to me that the reason he was able to solve the problem so quickly was because he had dealt with similar issues from previous tenants and accumulated some experience and solutions. The letter also included an SD card. Mr. Dono said he bought this for $70 from a YouTuber. An unuploaded video. It should explain the speculation I mentioned briefly in my thank you letter. About the children of foreign descent. I opened the computer. The video showed it was filmed 5 years ago, which was when my previous tenant lived here, when I was in this house. The scene outside the house where I was staying. This house was currently dark, with the lights off, chewed over and over again in the lazy darkness of midnight. Then came a sound, seemingly from afar. A series of voices, seemingly from children. In a language I couldn't understand at all, and in a completely off-key manner. I was chanting a word that sounded like a name. This name, like an electric current, shot through my brain. It was the name I'd heard in the song sung that night after I'd put little Kuji in solitary confinement. A name different from the previous occupants. It seemed to be a familiar version of the song I'd heard. And then little Kuji had explained to me earlier that those arrows were the work of a few of his friends. Thus, the arrows in the rooms of those foreign children, and the songs heard at midnight, were all connected and explained, but these couldn't explain my ultimate question. Who are they really? What is the purpose of their actions? The following months were the same. The arrows on my wall kept increasing. Over time, I was even able to figure out the pattern of their appearances. For example, the days from Monday to Sunday correspond to the 7 colors: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple, and black. The arrows seem to have a consistent direction each week, as if pointing to something unknown. As time passes, the position of the arrows in the room seems to be getting higher. This thing seems to be growing, and at a speed that cannot be observed with the naked eye. It is growing. If such an unspeakable, filthy monster really exists, then this house would be nothing but evil and corruption. I quickly interrupted myself. Those nauseating thoughts. In the past month, neither my nor little Coogie's health has shown any signs of discomfort. As for the speculations about the monster, they have remained only in my subconscious, nameless guesses and imaginations. Perhaps it's because I ruined the walls of my new house with the fresh coat of paint. Or perhaps it's the arrows on the wall, giving a feeling of restlessness. Regardless, I still can't trust those strange foreign children, not at all. And I don't know since when. But I feel a natural aversion towards them. I deep down want to drive them 1,000 miles away. Even though, in some sense, they are my son's friends. As a child, little Kuji still has the ability to read his parents' moods. He definitely does. Since there was that one time when he mentioned his friends in front of me, I'm sure he noticed the anger in my eyes. It was never mentioned again. But those children were not afraid of my malice. The various colored arrows on the wall continued to increase every day. They carried the tune of the nursery rhyme called by Pasadi. It would still echo from our house every 2 to 3 days. It would pierce into my eardrum. I used to get up in the middle of several nights. I could see, inside and outside the house, several small dark figures would suddenly flash by. I followed their movements with my gaze, until they disappeared into the quiet midnight streets of the Pamian community. If you look up, you can see the moonlight filtering through the tree branches, casting countless fragmented shadows. It felt like countless eyes were peering into the house. And I knew that those gazes must have included those of the children. I remembered the community office director, who had helped me earlier, Mr. Dono. As a director with over 30 years of experience, he knew the history of what had happened in my house. Perhaps Mr. Dono might know something about it. So I took pen to paper and wrote a letter to tell old Mr. Dono about the many confusions I had after moving into my new house. Mr. Dono replied to me a week later. He briefly told me that he did know some unverified rumors, but it was inconvenient to present them in writing. If you want to know more, it's best to schedule a time during the afternoon break, on a bench in the central park of the Pamian community. Let's chat. In the end, we settled on a Sunday afternoon. Both sides arrived on time at the park. On a shaded bench. Old Dono was still the same as ever. We met and immediately asked if the sun was nice today. After exchanging a few pleasantries, we sat down. We started talking about the history behind my house. Some past events I wasn't aware of came up. My house, when traced back in time, can be directly linked to the founding period of the Pamian community. Coincidentally, Mr. Dano, I was one of the earliest developers of the Pamian community. Because of that, I witnessed the transformation of this community from an undeveloped wasteland into the livable, mid to high-end community it is today. As for the details of my house before construction, it seems Mr. Dano deliberately avoids reminiscing about them. Maybe it's because I'm getting old. Sometimes, I always end up confusing some indescribable nightmares with memories from over 30 years ago. The sun is just right, warming everything around me. I can even smell a hint of wool. I see Mr. Dano beside me. His eyes slightly squinted, seriously telling me his story. It was when the workers started the machines and began digging the land to lay the foundation. During the digging process, they seemed to have unearthed something hard. Everyone initially thought they had encountered a rock layer, but it was later confirmed that it was a solid, complete boulder. At that time, he was following his family. He supervised the engineering work in that area. But when he saw the boulder, perhaps because of some years earlier, at UC Berkeley, he had taken a few courses in semiotics. He quickly noticed that the surface of the boulder seemed to be engraved with A, similar to the patterns of symbols. But after all, he's not an expert in this field, and couldn't immediately conclude which ancient civilization symbols they belonged to. I also made A. I'm not sure if it was a right or wrong decision. I paused the on-site engineering work and called my professor at UC. He mentioned our strange discovery at the construction site. About half an hour later, my teacher and several excited archaeology professors who could hardly express themselves all appeared at the scene. The moment we saw the giant stone, those professors won't be able to reach a conclusion for a while. An hour later, the archaeological team that came to assist with the excavation also arrived on site with professional equipment. Through underground detection, they indeed discovered a large, rectangular, square stone. And after about a week of meticulous excavation, a stone of approximately 100 cubic meters was unearthed. It was dug up. The entire massive stone was engraved with meaningless symbols. When he saw the full view of the stone, a sense of unsettling dread seeped out from within the airtight stone. It seemed to tell him that this was a Pandora's box that should not be opened, a box that should never be shared. He learned from a conversation among the professors nearby that the giant stone, after being examined, was found to be hollow. It may contain some substances that current machines are unable to detect. Due to the immense weight of the stone, a preliminary examination is required. It will need to be cut before it can be brought back for more detailed study. The results of the preliminary tests shocked everyone. Based on the isotopic analysis of the megalith's surface, this stone can be traced back 70 million years. This far surpasses known human history. Everyone reacted to this result with different emotions. It seemed like optimists and pessimists were debating the civilization behind the megalith, engaged in an intense discussion, but it didn't mean much to him. At the time, he just wanted to quickly finish the surveying work on this side, and transport the ominous giant stone back, so that the development project on this side could continue. 3 days later, the archaeological team officially began cutting the giant stone. As the person in charge of supervising the Pamir community development, I was also invited to witness the initial results of the on-site work. The cutting ceremony was simple but not without a sense of ritual. Someone used a red ribbon, and even tied on a few simple firecrackers. Several professors offered their speculations on the results within the giant stone. In short, before the cutting machine cut the huge stone, the atmosphere on the scene was filled with joy and excitement. Then the cutting machine started. After a dull thud, the huge stone was officially cut open. Everyone rushed forward to see what was inside, but most people were disappointed. Because almost everyone saw it was just an empty heart. Except for one person. I don't remember his name, but I still have an impression of him. He was my professor in the university's semiotics course. A few years have passed, and not much has changed. But at the moment the stone was cut open, I felt like he had become a completely different person. He no longer seemed like the rational and meticulous scholar. He seemed more like a fanatic believer, staring at what seemed to exist within the stone. This supreme entity of an empty, void-like space. He was muttering some incomprehensible name. Pusodi. Hearing that name again, I suddenly felt the afternoon sun was so cold and piercing. It wasn't just me. My professor from back then also noticed the semiotics professor's unusual behavior. At the moment he was about to go crazy and rush towards the stone, we pulled him back together. Soon, the on-site staff and professors came up to assist in restraining the raging semiotic professor. The terrifying force he unleashed at that moment could be felt deep within, the urgency radiating from him. Naturally, that was not him. Old Dono never would have imagined that he would later kill almost all of the staff present at the scene. And 7 of them had their eyes gouged out for some kind of cult ritual. Among the 7 was also his innocent mentor, the professor. The police caught that semiotic professor when he's in the house you're living in now, conducting a bizarre occult ritual. When he was arrested, he was still muttering strange things incessantly. He claimed he had awakened Sasudi, that humanity would welcome the arrival of a great union. That mad semiotics professor. Right until he died, in a California state prison. He never revealed to anyone outside why he went mad. He saw things that ordinary people had never seen. In the following days, the first batch of residents in the Pamian community gave feedback to Old Dono. They said that the house I'm in now always gives off a nauseating, the evil and unbearable noises. Even my neighbor's previous tenant filed an intruder report against him, claiming that around my house there were numerous unidentified intruders. That's about it. Having said that, Mr. Dono rose from the bench, stretching his body. He handed me an envelope and said to me, "In the library of the University of California, there is a book that was once part of Arkham University's collection. I think if you could get access to that book, you might find the answer you're looking for inside." One last thing. Those children. Although I'm not sure who they are, I don't know what's behind their actions, but it's appropriate to give young people some trust. After all, so far, besides occasionally disturbing the peace, they haven't caused any substantial harm. Oh, goodbye. Young man, enjoy the sunshine before sunset. Have a wonderful day. I said goodbye to Mr. Dono on a park bench. I opened the letter Mr. Dono had just given me. From the moment I received the envelope, I could sense its age. And there was a mark on the letter where it had been cut with a paper cutter, and then glued back together. Clearly, this seems to be a letter that Mr. Dono might have read. I took out the letter inside, and quickly scanned its contents. If I'm not mistaken, it should be a letter from a former resident named Marchi Laturi, reporting a problem to Mr. Dono. Marchi Laturi's encounter in his room. It seems that the situation is almost identical to what I encountered in the room. There are strange arrows, and one can hear eerie songs in the middle of the night. What's different from me is that the arrows in the house in Makarat seem to be drawn with ketchup, salad dressing, and ink from ink bottles, among other liquids. And Mr. Masalatu lives in this building as a single man, while I live here with my son, Kuji. Maybe it's because of the children that my child came into contact with them. Perhaps I should have asked Kuji about them earlier, about their story. But I don't know why. When I was in the house, I felt such disgust towards those foreign children. Not to mention that because of those people, the relationship between little Kuji and I became terribly unpleasant. I picked up the letter again, and saw on the back of the paper a string of handwriting written with a fountain pen. The biggest mistake of my life was rescuing a strange stranger and flipping through the 2 books in his arms. I had intended to bury this secret forever, waiting for some moment in the future when someone could offer a proper solution. But the truth is, this was an incredibly foolish mistake. If I disappear one day or go insane, remember that in the wall cavity of the house there are 2 yellowed books hidden. Please find them and burn them before the next tenant moves in. Evening is approaching. along with the warmth of the setting sun, a little bit detached from the surface of my body, making me slightly disoriented. By the time I snapped back to reality, I found the sunlight had already faded. In the night, the murky and chaotic blackness was crawling over the world. Alright, from this moment on, I believe, completely, there are definitely problems with my house. All the circumstances are confirming the hidden taboos and malice of this house. But right now, I'm trapped in a dilemma. I want to move out, but my current situation doesn't allow me to move to any new place. On the one hand, the loan for the purchase of the Pamian community property hasn't been repaid yet, and wanting to transfer the house in the short term is almost impossible. Yes, Mr. Godfrey, if you step away from the elite perspective and try to understand what I'm saying, you'll easily see the current social environment. I still have to constantly face the challenge of the layoff wave on my own. Naturally, I can't withstand such twists and turns. And as for the house, at most, there are just crayon-drawn arrows and singing in the middle of the night. At the moment, it seems there hasn't been any real harm to our lives. But why was a detailed notebook stored in the wooden paneling? Could it explain the connection between the strange phenomena in the house from the very beginning? I couldn't suppress my curiosity about the unknown future, hidden deep within my human heart. Was a vague fear. It affected my judgment. Those who dwell on the surface are always the pursuers of truth. As long as you confirm the existence of the truth, then regardless of whether it's ultimately revealed, humanity will invariably be immersed in the fear of such darkness. The only difference lies in how much that fear penetrates a person. I need to figure this out. If possible, it's best to eliminate those strange phenomena before they take root in reality. With this goal in mind, I chose a weekend and followed Mr. Dono's instructions to head to the University of California Library, go investigate that rare book at Arkham University's archives. Things didn't go as smoothly as I'd hoped. I asked around the staff there, but I came up empty-handed. I almost got labeled as mentally unstable and kicked out of the library. I don't know whether to call it lucky or not. I was like a headless fly in the library, searching in a vast sea of books. I ran into someone who seemed to be a student from this school, but he was a little strange. He claimed to be Du Abu Muhammad, an exchange student from a university in Arabia, currently majoring in the mysterious studies of the West Asia region, folklore and symbol research. His English was surprisingly fluent. He didn't care whether I believed him, or whether I was interested in his mysticism. He started telling me about what he considered to be the darkness, the bizarre doctrine of truth, and the so-called Great Communion with the darkness. I put my mind into standby mode, so I could maintain a relatively polite demeanor, while listening to his endless rambling, although deep down I was thinking, if such a person were to fall into hell, would they still be able to endure the torture of having their tongue pulled out? Finally, he seemed to notice my embarrassment and confusion, and stopped talking for a moment. "Sir, if you don't believe my intuition, why would I have found you here?" His slightly hoarse yet magnetic voice restarted the thought process in my brain. Du Abo could tell that I was finally showing some interest. In a soft tone, he mentioned something that left me unsettled. "Sir, I seem to sense that you have a desire to explore a collection in the library. But I would advise you, after all, sir, you are still in the surface world of reality. I really don't recommend that you touch things that might completely overturn everything you know as a human. The forbidden knowledge." I naturally didn't listen to his words. Even if it were Mr. Godfrey, you would feel the same way, wouldn't you? But behind his words seems to lie a series of crazy actions attempting to transcend human understanding and perception, and the aftermath they bring, leading to outcomes that are utterly detrimental to rational thought. But at the same time, I also sensed the smell of a breakthrough in the investigation. I asked Duab if I could have more access to borrow items from the collection. He nodded in acknowledgement, and said that he indeed had it. However, due to the difficulty of frequent visits, the next visit to the library would have to be postponed until next week. He said that as long as I agreed to let him use my house for a period of occult research, and complete the follow-up work regarding him, some writings on the history of mysticism, and if I can uncover some truths, maybe we can together deal with the strange phenomena in my house. This is clearly the closest I've ever been to the truth. And absolutely an offer I can't refuse. I told myself, deep down, as long as he remains honest, that is definitely worth the risk. The risk of the unknown. After an inner struggle, I agreed to Duab Muhammad's terms. However, as a reciprocal condition, I also proposed to apply for a formal research grant from your University of California, and the documents proving his identity. He readily agreed. So we exchanged contact information. This young Arab man named Duabu did indeed complete the document processing I requested. About a week later, he arrived with several heavy books and a bag of items, seemingly used for some kind of ritual. Arrived near my house. Of course, I didn't want little Kuji to have any further contact with outsiders linked to the occult. Therefore, before Duab Muhammad arrived at my house, I sent little Kuji to his grandparents' house to spend his 10-week summer vacation. This also meant that the upcoming time was for the two of us to explore and touch upon the unspeakable taboo. It was time for us to make contact and explore. The moment Dua Muhammad arrived at my house, although I had already mentally prepared myself, but I could still see his surprise when he first entered the house, at the arrow symbols all over my side of the room. I recounted to Duab the strange occurrences in the house recently, just as I had previously told Mr. Dano. I explained the various strange phenomena I'd experienced in the house. I also added what Mr. Dano and I had discussed that day. After listening to my account, he thought for a moment. Then, he asked me for my records of the arrow fragments, and my son Kuji's drawings. Up to this point, as a witness, I have provided all the information I could offer to Duab. And this young man, although he was just an Arab studying mysticism, seemed to have no hesitation in revealing his discoveries and conclusions from his research. I turned a small room in the attic into a simple study. For a long time after that, Duabu stayed in this place. He was conducting his secret research for nearly a week. He, like me, witnessed new arrows appearing out of nowhere in a completely locked room. Occasionally, a short figure would appear in the room. A strange song would be hummed at midnight to the tune of Snow Lotus. I once asked Duabio, "Are there any relevant anecdotes about those strange children?" Duab also stated that he is currently completely uncertain, although he did feel an unprecedented eeriness in the house. It seemed to be a contact and feeling beyond human comprehension, although he quickly associated it with the Necronomicon, the Arab madman, who praised Abdul al-Hazard, the Great Old One, Cthulhu, and the spiritual sensations it brought, but with some differences. Although, through his mind, he was able to see through an unspeakable mist, and glimpse a vast, absurd, and empty land, there is also an endless expanse, radiating a strange green glow. But these scenes seem to not belong to that distant ancient time, nor to the age when the Old Ones ruled the world, and all was desolate. This made him uneasy. Duabu, through my observations, recorded. With his observations over the past few days, he became more confident in his conclusion. He stated to me, "There is indeed an indescribable presence in the room." In the house, the increasing number of arrows serve as evidence of its existence. And aside from the earlier records I made about the changes in color, in terms of quantity, if that presence is acting in the shadows, the number of arrows on the wall would actually increase. This also indirectly shows that drawing arrows suggests our character is also feeling nervous and uneasy. Duab confirmed the earlier theory I had about the arrows being related to those strange children, and believes this seems to be growing slowly, and an entity trying to act. It should be Puzat, the Great Union. He asked me if I believe that the beginning and end of the universe are chaos. If I believe, then I could understand those children who sing at midnight, and the disgusting creature playing the flute next to the Lord of Chaos and Ignorance is connected to it all. To appease that extremely dangerous and nauseating master. Although Tophet is considered an outer god, he is still far from it, but the dimension he occupies is already far beyond the human brain. Understanding this kind of information, if you really want a simple, from a human perspective, you can liken the prosauropod's view of our dimension to a person peering at a bacterium. Then you can appreciate The gap in power and the difference between their civilization and ours. Fortunately, because of those children, Pusodi remains in a state of deep sleep. We don't know if those children can traverse human time to maintain his sleep. But if that day comes, one of Pusodi's countless millions of gazes notices human civilization, perhaps the part of Pusodi that belongs to our dimension, will awaken and destroy the entire human-filled world. I can sense it, this Arab man's increasingly uncontrolled panic and fear. Duab is warning me. Although Pusodi is currently dormant, but in terms of shape, it is in an amorphous state. If we count from the time Mr. Dano excavated the giant stone and cut it open, Pusodi should have grown from an undetectable size to its current size over 30 years. It is now as large as this house. Moreover, this is still only from the perspective of us three-dimensional humans, an angle only I can see. Perhaps Pusodi has grown to the point where he can extend his hateful tentacles and claws into dimensions and spaces beyond comprehension. These words undoubtedly increased my worries, not because I completely believed Duab Muhammad, but because this whole series of events seemed like a fairy tale. And so, if that's the case, although I may not be a completely staunch materialist, but my interest in the occult stops at things like demons and ghosts. Rather, his words inevitably remind me of what Mr. Donahoe said about that mad semiotics professor. As Mark Twain said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it always rhymes. Subconsciously, it seems to be hinting at me that if I keep delving into the secrets of the darkness, he will be the next mad professor, a tragic replica. I don't even know why. For this baseless premonition, I chose to deny it once again. I neither expressed my doubts, nor did I expel this young man from my house because of it. Duab Muhammad, this exchange student from the University of California, an Arab well-versed in mysticism, for the next 8 weeks, he began compiling his work on the history of mysticism. The main part of his day, he locked himself in the attic of my house, lost in the countless, lightless abysses of the universe. Dark secrets. From time to time, I would see him come down from the attic to the kitchen, taking food out of the refrigerator. There must have been a moment when he looked up at the clock. He would even occasionally take the clock down from the wall, fiddling with it, claiming that time seemed to be behaving strangely. Every time I saw this scene, it was like looking back over 40 years, to those outdated stories in science fiction magazines from my youth. I couldn't help but laugh. Either the clock in the lobby is broken, or time, this thing that moves in a straight line, couldn't possibly go wrong so easily. But this behavior is within the range I can accept. I can sense Duab's mental state, showing a clear, daily decline. From time to time, he mumbles some indescribable incantations. At times, it seemed as though he was speaking in Arabic, pleading for divine forgiveness and salvation. This was often accompanied by a long period of prayer. Sometimes, he would let out terrifying, inhuman howls from his mouth at night, whispering repulsive, indescribable blasphemous curses. This seriously affected my mental state, and it exacerbated my mental health problems. Several times, I even wanted to scream and drive it away, or get a meat cleaver or boning knife from the kitchen and completely kill it. But I didn't do it. My subconscious seemed to be afraid. The Arab man who explored the existence of the Guardian. Maybe it's just an illusion. I can always feel a crowd of people around my house. But it seems, they are no longer the 7 children who used to sing, but a group of tall figures, with malice, unsettling. Or perhaps these shadows will combine together. It became a terrifying afterimage, a grotesque mixture of limbs, a horrifying phantom made of assorted body parts. My reason tells me this is merely a hallucination caused by my poor mental state, a figment of my imagination. In my mind, these words merged with some of my confused and unclear memories. They became intertwined. It formed a consciousness that seemed unfamiliar to me, but the community doctor in Pamian gave me advice and warnings, and the prescription was all filled with dense, illegible script. I couldn't understand what it referred to as future medicine. The children encountered a frog or insect on the road. They might not disregard the curiosity towards small things, as adults do so directly. Nor would they heartlessly send them to the door of death. Instead, they might take a child's approach, to show them attention. Only when the call of their parents to go home appears, will they be forced to leave. As for those small creatures, either taken back to the house, to live in a specially made cage, or killed by the adults' unreasonable hands. Either that, or the children simply lose interest in them. From then on, what happens to them is no longer something children should be concerned with. I don't know where those foreign children went. I don't know when it happened, but it seems like I never heard children's songs again. Maybe it really was those tall adults, standing in a space and dimension we can no longer look at directly, calling them home. It is precisely because of Duabu's words that their disappearance often signals that the house, that twisted madness, may have already awakened. Duabu Muhammad, that young Arab man, seems to be gradually losing the rationality needed for a researcher, even as a human being. I need to watch out for him. His words are becoming increasingly incomprehensible. He has probably finished that historical work. It led to a complete mental breakdown. Duoab no longer openly shared his research findings with me, as he did 8 weeks ago. He hardly took care of his hair. On his face, there was a patch of reddish-brown beard. In the midst of the tangled growth were his bloodshot eyes, a result of severe lack of rest. The frequency of our conversations had drastically dropped. He was even restraining himself to the utmost, as if he had some unspeakable secret that he wanted to confide in me, but swallowed it back down quickly out of fear. I tried my best to point to the refrigerator, to avoid buying raw meat as much as possible, also because he seemed to have confused a normal person's stomach, the food he could accept. Besides, he seemed to be deliberately avoiding those arrows on the houses. He even went so far as to use various liquid paints to cover up these arrows. Of course, I put away all the knives in the kitchen. I hid them under the bedside table in my room. What I didn't know, the sensation beyond the 5 senses is screaming wildly. It tells me that danger seems to be getting closer. But we are trapped in a hopeless situation we can't escape from. Until the final week, the remaining sanity, gradually worn down, is still holding on to the last command over my actions. I have about 1 more week to clean up this mess of a house. Get this seemingly crazy Arab out of my house. I need to evict him. Then arrange a long-term loan. I need to get as far away from this house as possible. I've planned everything rationally, the rest is set. But first, I need to go up to the attic. I need to explain everything to him. Wait for me to climb up. I only just realized that Duabu seemed to have destroyed the attic's furnishings beyond recognition. This included the incandescent light bulbs used for illumination. In the ensuing darkness, I heard Duabu's voice, filled with extreme terror. He was trembling, suppressing his panic as much as possible, warning me in a voice that was, surprisingly, normal. Sodi's gaze has fallen upon our present moment. But this is not what the higher beings who created Sodi expected. Pow, in meditation, discovered a gate that doesn't exist in our space. The massive stone, which was unearthed 30 years ago, could possibly be the peculiar medium through which one could cut into and understand that great door. As he spoke, he suddenly let out an ear-piercing, horrifying scream. Only then did I realize, in the darkness, countless hostile, long-waiting and incomprehensible mysterious forces were watching. Everything suddenly erupted at an unexpected moment. That poor young Arab man, in the final moment of his life, in the midst of the most insane death, with only half of his body left, crawled to my feet. He handed me 2 books, still with his intestines hanging from them. He placed them in my hands. My instincts told me I had to leave immediately. My hands frantically searched in the darkness. I finally found an escape route. My subconscious delivered a desperate message to me. Duab Muhammad, the young Arab man dedicated to researching the occult. He was torn apart in a mysterious space that he could never understand, even in death. And I was able to receive the final message through human hearing. It was Duab, desperately shouting the names of his family in Arabic, and pleading for forgiveness from his God. After that, it was nothing but inhuman wails and screams. That must be an ending more terrifying than death itself. During my escape, I missed a step on the house's staircase. I fell and hit my head, although I regained a bit of my senses. Still, my body reacted strongly to the images I had just witnessed, which were hard to comprehend. It caused a severe rejection response. My head was splitting with pain. It seems like there is vomit everywhere on the floor, as well as excrement. I struggled to get up. I was thinking of looking for a phone in the house. I hoped the call would go through, that someone would come to help me. But the reality exceeded my expectations. The communication device in the house, it seems a man called Loudun Snow, was destroyed. His biggest mistake in life was accepting his wife's divorce. He covered up his psychological problems, took his child, and moved into this ominous house. Ultimately, a series of chain reactions led to the tragedy. Perhaps, the best medicine to treat that man's mental illness was future medicine. I tried to alert my neighbors by calling for help. But only Mr. Masalatu found me in the end. But he took the book from my arms. Later, what happened to Marcalaturi? I seem to be the only witness. I know the real reason for his disappearance. My neighbor actually heard Ledunsno's cries for help. But he didn't help him. It's simply because he was the one Mr. Dono mentioned that year, the witness to the bizarre church incident. My neighbor is just a poor, insignificant mortal. But on a quiet, peaceful night, was awakened by a call from the depths of a nightmare. Through the window, he saw a massive church, built from various dark, strange stones, towering over 10,000 feet high. And it was not just that. Through the church's dark windows, he saw grotesque, distorted figures passing by. Lightning flashed in the sky, and with each flash, a gigantic figure appeared in the air, something with an octopus head and bat wings. As a result, he suffered from a severe mental illness. These images, it later became his terrifying secret, one he wouldn't even reveal despite the mental torment he suffered. Duabu, who died in his house, his corpse spoke again. The only special medium to contact that dark door. It was the huge stone quarried 30 years ago. So I ran desperately towards that freshly cut stone. Although, what others see is only the empty interior. From an invisible perspective, the inside of the stone metaphorically signifies the birth and return of Pusodi, and the moment of touching his door of darkness. I was so close to touching that dark truth. It's all because of my meddling colleague, and that bastard leader named Dono. But I was lucky enough. As long as I could give vision to the 7 children of miracles born in Pusodi, I could also be honored to become part of the Great Union. My house has become incredibly unfamiliar. At this moment, it has already surpassed 3-dimensional space, and been reorganized. Inside the house, things that were originally covered and concealed by Duabu are completely peeled away. Drawings on the walls, resembling a capillary network, made with colored pens, or with colored seasonings, depicting arrows, are stretched and distorted, leading toward the blank space pointed to by the arrows. In a space of images I couldn't comprehend. Those arrows eventually traced out a figure that was almost 3-dimensional, yet twisted and massive. That was the Great Union. A powerful and terrifying presence, on par with the ancient rulers. Aside from that, it seemed as though my house had been shattered into countless fragments of images, connected in another space I couldn't understand. Including the ceiling above my head. It was like an image loading error, turning into something that seemed transparent, yet also seemed to be in infinite darkness. The moon cast a glow nearly as dazzling as the sun above my head. It passed through countless tiny gaps in space, transforming into a sea of light and shadow like crumbs of cookies, countless invisible eyes with human thoughts are focused on me. I seem to have become almost omniscient. I can see images of the kitchen. My clock is constantly turning backward. Space and time are completely overturned from this point on. Perhaps there are creatures or objects, but they do not have fixed forms, volume or mass. But they seem to be the humans of the past. Ugly, dirty, dull, and insane. These bizarre things ultimately destroyed my sanity. and completely damaged my brain. I regret it. I still haven't seen the true face of Psoti. Because just a human, whose power is so small it's invisible. The image can't help me understand his existence, and he hasn't noticed my existence, as insignificant as I am, even though he has hundreds or thousands of ways to perceive. I finally found a way. It seemed to be a road leading to a pitch-black church. Through countless corpses of different races, behind the massive walls built of bones, I finally entered this seemingly comprehensible to human reason, lightless, blasphemous church. I spent almost eternity deciphering the endless stairs. Those bas-reliefs that once recorded history. Human history seems so long. The towering civilization took hundreds and thousands of years to slowly build, yet collapsed in just a few days. By the time I reached the top floor, my body and consciousness were both corrupted. But in the immortal time, it did not turn to dust. I finally reached the top floor of this tall tower, following a few dim, emitting lights of a color not belonging to any spectrum on Earth. Or perhaps resembling oil lamps. I saw a dark throne with an eerie and distorted beauty. There is a dark figure sitting above, seemingly like an Egyptian pharaoh. What surprised me was that he actually understood the languages spoken in all the dimensions of the universe, including the language I speak. His voice was dull and monotonous, yet carried a terrifying, profound power. It gives the feeling of madness yet rationality, the sensation of the highest sage. I felt his guidance. I walked up to him. I watched him open 2 yellowed books. He spoke to me in English. The year 730 AD. A man named Abduel Yazratha's Arabian madman wrote the Necronomicon. More than 1,200 years later, a man named Duab Muhammad, also an Arabian madman, gained inspiration from the Necronomicon. From the art of divination, he saw a future that transcended time and space. From that day on, I wrote Echoes of the Afterday. This book concerns the records of the Great United Society. In human history, the day the Old Ones awakened and descended once more upon this world, chronology became meaningless, reason turned to illusion. Silence fell upon the civilized world. They once hid in the dark corners, worshipping the old gods, the cultists of the ancient rulers. Now they walk once again upon the earth. Ancient palaces rise from the sea. The dark, silent years once again blanket the land and sky. The extreme worshippers become the standard by which human behavior is judged. The survivors found a corner of space that could not be understood. In this strange and distorted space, they built this tall, pitch-black cathedral. After an indescribable length of time, they eventually evolved into a higher dimension. They became a great race known as the Psoti. From then on, nightmares and madness became entertainment. An understanding beyond madness became the daily sensation of future Psoti. Driven by malice and hostility toward the old masters, they are dedicated to finding the ultimate power to balance the old masters, to return to Earth, and reclaim this world. Thus, I am amidst the procession of the world. I found Psoti within this tall tower. I witnessed what I showed you, the unimaginable and terrifying miracles. Part of them, Psoti devoutly became my follower. From the unspeakable gate of darkness, I glimpsed Azathoth's throne. And from the cosmic abyss of darkness, in the depths of the forest without greenery, eavesdropping, the secret of Nicholas of the Gauls, untransmittable. On a day with no recorded date, the Psoti tribe, from within their people, according to a 7-day week, interbred with other ancient races, and gave birth to 7 beings known as the Children of Miracle. They were the earliest part of the Great Union. Later, in the deepest chamber beneath the church, the 7 miracle children were sacrificed on the hidden altar of the chamber. The Great Union of Psoti was thus born in the pitch-black, profound forest, where Saint Nicholas once dwelled. Thus, the Psoti family, the giant stone recording the time of the apocalypse was found. Psoti was sealed within the giant stone. Along with the 7 children of the wonders, they entered the reversal of time. They slept until the era when the old ones would once again descend upon the world. The swift destruction of the old world would return, leading to the endless, sunless apocalypse. When the time of apocalypse arrives, the old ones will descend upon the world once again, and then, the ruler of the future will also awaken in the dark corners of time. He will open the door of darkness. His power will reshape the order of the apocalypse. At that time, the calendar will be rebuilt. Humanity will also take Pusodi as the new god. They will cover the former faith once again. I am astonished by this. I questioned the pharaoh before me, asking why he was willing to reveal these almost unbelievable ultimate secrets to me. He did not answer. He knew very well that before becoming Susens, humanity was purely a rational animal. Even if I could return to that real world and tell the whole world, they wouldn't believe me. They would just consider me a pure madman. That's also why, when humans fall into endless nightmares and madness, they seek pleasures that can bring them joy. He finished telling me all of this. With a silent flash of lightning in an instant, his figure vanished into the brief white light. Then, my human reason and senses quickly began to recover. Soon, a series of chilling whispers echoed in my ears, accompanied by the nauseating sound of joints cracking, piercing my eardrums. A deep-seated fear quickly overwhelmed my reason. Before those humanoid giants tore open a rift from an incomprehensible space and lunged at me, all I remember was running desperately, without a care for anything. Even though I'd already suffered multiple fractures. But luckily, my legs can still run. In the endless terror and darkness, amidst the maddening screams and roars, I lost consciousness. Until I woke up again, I had been bound with straps and bandages, tied down in the ICU of a California state hospital. In between that, I don't know exactly how or from where I escaped. People found me again, suffering from multiple fractures. My body was nearly dead from the strain. Because body parts were found in my house. And because they found that Arab man's blood tissue on me, I have been bound by a crime that isn't mine. As for my statement, even my lawyer refuses to believe it. And the key evidence that could prove my innocence does not exist in the wooden wall cavity mentioned in the letter by the former tenant, Mr. Makaratu. Yes, the FBI evidence collection team followed the instructions in the envelope. They sawed through the walls of my house, but there was nothing inside. In the end, the verdict was that, due to my mental evaluation, I was confined to a psychiatric treatment center in California, just over 500 meters from the Pamir community. And by coincidence, I was locked up in a place that, apparently, had been there for 30 years. The room where Professor Fong, the serial killer, was held. The room he was held in. The environment of the treatment center is good, except when night falls each day. Those terrifying memories I don't want to recall come flooding back into my mind as nightmares. Because of this, I drink coffee or energy drinks much more frequently to maintain a high frequency of light sleep every day, to prevent myself from once again trying to understand that maddening, collapsing, bizarre space. I applied to the treatment center to purchase watercolor pens, so that when these densely packed arrows appear again in my hospital room, and all point toward me, the doctors at the treatment center won't make any further assumptions because of this. As long as I don't engage in any threatening behavior, the staff will show tolerance toward me. They even regularly send cleaning personnel into the ward to help clear away those strange arrows that destabilize my emotions. Compared to before I came here, Mr. Makaraturi, who has become part of the Great United Front, that Arab, Duab Muhammad, and that man who went mad because of the boulder, and later dismembered himself in the hospital, the professor of semiotics, my ending can be considered quite fulfilling. I don't think there's any need to announce to the world how many years we've been dead, the apocalypse that will happen. I'm only deeply worried about my child. That is, little Coogie. I can't imagine how a child, after the summer vacation ends, could face that filthy, blood-stained, gloomy new home. That father, who everyone says killed someone and went insane. I don't know what will happen to my child. Will you touch the Great Union because of those so-called miracle children? Will you risk the Great Union for them? The forbidden secrets behind Pasodi. Because of such concerns, I have seen my child many times while hallucinating. My child. Chanting in an evil language I couldn't understand. Singing that eerie song in a strange tune. Every time this happens, I lose a whole day's sleep. In the dead of night, I listen carefully to the next room, those whispers that sound like curses, accompanied by roars from afar, and the strange sounds of limbs contorting. Dear Mr. Godfrey, when you see this, I think, there must be a house in the Pamian community that has been sealed off for a long time. The rational civilization refuses to believe me, and is too afraid to confront the terrifying secrets behind the world. They certainly wouldn't destroy that ominous giant stone, because of my unspeakable encounter. I'm not sure whether you believe the events I described in the letter, or if you'll go to the house to verify them yourself. I wouldn't recommend you go to that house, especially at night, a time when evil secret gatherings are likely to occur. You might find shadows of people with a severe imbalance in size and height, or perhaps the twisted, incomprehensible shadow in the house. Maybe you will block out news that disturbs the peace and tranquility of the Pamian community. After everything is cleaned up, arrange for a new resident to move in. If anything happened, please inform the new resident. Never climb up to that attic at night. To avoid the spirit of Muhammad Duab, whispering terrible secrets from beyond dimensions, leading others to touch that invisible door of evil that cannot be seen, and summon forth unspeakable forces. Written by Lethunsnow. Written in California. September 27, 2012. Okay, tonight's story ends here. The fan has made up his mind. A big decision leads to a big self-destruction. To make such a long single-episode story, I don't know if anyone will listen. But I still look forward to more friends submitting your written ghost stories to me. I think everyone's imagination is no less than those posts on No Sleep, the ones in the community. If you want your story to be featured in the next episode of Strange Tales, feel free to share it. We'll see you next time.